We're going to move into our last panel of the day, so I'd like to welcome our panelists to the stage. So as our momentum for employee ownership has grown, so has the involvement of government agencies. You've been hearing some words about that. So you can be first, come on. Here, Lisa's here, so we're coming. So we're going to be talking with some agencies today. Some are relatively new to this work. Some agencies have been in this work for a long time. So let's see. I'm missing one. All right, there we go. So without further ado, so let's see, now I can try to see where, all right, anyway, I'm going to say a name. All right, for this panel, I have Alexhakz, Special Assistant to the President for Economic Development and Industrial Strategy, National Economic Council at the White House. Next to Alex is Leroy Garcia, Chief of Staff, Rural Business Cooperative Service, U.S. Department of Agriculture. Okay, next to Leroy is Lisa? Was Lisa, where'd she go? Lisa Gomez, Assistant Secretary for Employee Benefits Security Administration at the U.S. Department of Labor. And at the very end there, we have David Brown, Director of Policy, Office of the Administrator, U.S. Small Business Administration. Shoo. So as I mentioned, the momentum for employee ownership has grown. You all sort of have different roles to play. And so just to kind of get us started, I'm hoping each of you can briefly introduce yourself, talk about your role, and what has drawn you to work on employee ownership. And I think I'll just I'll just go in the order that I wrote in the guide, so I'm not going to catch anybody off guard. So Lisa, I'm going to start with you.
Sure. Wasn't sure if it was on or not. Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Gomez, and I am the Assistant Secretary of the Employee Benefits Security Administration within the Department of Labor. And we, as we'll discuss more today, have been charged at the Department of Labor and are really excited about this new opportunity to be implementing certain provisions of the Work Act, as Senator Sanders mentioned, and as you've heard today. And with respect to the promotion and education about different worker ownership models for both employees and employers, and also, as was mentioned, to promulgate formal guidance with respect to the valuation of employer stock. So we're really excited about those things and happy to be here today. Oh, and
Alex?
Hi there, Alexhakz. I'm Special Assistant to the President for Economic Development and Industrial Strategy at the White House National Economic Council. One day they will give us shorter titles. We can get through these quicker. But what drew me to worker ownership as an issue and bringing it over to the NEC and the administration is I used to work for Senator Sanders, and hard to spend some time with him without hearing his personal passion for the issue and without being coerced into working on it in some way. I covered economic policy and labor policy for him on the 2020 presidential campaign as well as on the budget committee. Worked on the Work Act and employee ownership bank and a number of other initiatives and proposals, and was thrilled as we worked through the what the artist formerly known as the Build Back Better Act and the many iterations and names that went through it on some of the initiatives and proposals we were able to put forward. Not all of them succeeded, but really getting the Work Act through and Insecure and in the appropes or the omnibus at the end of the year was really a watershed for those of us who've been working on it for quite some time now. And so very excited over here at the NEC too to help work on implementing as well as coordinate some of the other activities we have in the employee and worker ownership space.
Great, thank you. David.
Thank you, Maureen. Thank you, Aspen, for putting this all together. It's an honor to be here on behalf of Administrator Guzman, talk about the SBA's role in promoting worker ownership. I'm Director of Policy and Planning at SBA. So my job is to work on whatever the administrator asks me to work on. And that includes our capital programs, in many cases, also contracting and counseling programs that we offer to small businesses. What motivated me in this policy area? For me, it starts as a personal issue. I grew up in Atlanta. My Aunt Marcy, I was very close to. She was an entrepreneurial woman. She had her own business making sandwiches and delivering them to hair salons, and then moved out of the city to Peachtree City, Georgia, and couldn't maintain her business anymore, but got a job working at Publix, grocery store. Publix is the largest ESOP in the US. I think it still is, in any case. She had so much pride in that job, working at Publix. One, because she could, exercise her creativity in choosing recipes and making them for people to sample in the store, but also because she owned a part of the business. And she had great pride in that job that she worked in at the end of her career for over 10 years. And that really stuck with me. Later in life, I was working at a think tank, Third Way, considered a center-left think tank. Was very excited about the buzz around ESOPs and employer ownership, and got to work with Professor Blasi on a paper that he authored for Third Way. And that brings me to another point, which is the appeal of this area across the political spectrum. Senator Sanders is a champion, the center-left think tank is, and when I worked on the Hill, there was plenty of bipartisan legislation being drafted around the idea as well. Finally, I'll just mention one other idea, and this isn't anything new or additional to what Senator Sanders had to say at the opening, but competition. President Biden, Administrator Guzman reflects all the time the importance of not allowing too much consolidation to occur in any industry. And as we have small business owners across the country thinking about how they're going to exit, we want to prevent that consolidation, allow them to sell, keep businesses independent, local, locally owned and controlled, and what better way to do that than through employee ownership.
Great, thank you. Leroy?
Great, thank you. Good afternoon. As mentioned, my name is Leroy Garcia, and I have the proud honor of serving as the Chief of Staff for Rural Business Cooperative Services. The Administrator Dirksen Londrigan sends her regrets that she cannot join us, but she's traveling, so you're stuck with me for today. I'm a lifelong Coloradan, a combat Marine who recently was serving at the Pentagon as an appointee over the Department of the Navy. So I'm newly minted over at USDA, about 55 plus days in on working days. So I'm not a subject matter. I've left my cards and some literature that we want to be able to share with you, but I want to help share not only the cooperative side, but the rural business side also. Employee ownership is a growing and proven pathway that helps us build wealth and have dignity, especially for our workers in their workplace in a more economical way. And at USDA Rural Development, we know that a stronger community is rooted in its people. Through loans, through grants, through partnerships with lenders, we provide these tools and resources for rural family businesses, for communities, so that they can prosper not only for today, but for the future. And just to give you a perspective at Rural Business Cooperative Services and RD, we have 3 different divisions, right? We have Rural Business Cooperative Services, Rural Housing Services, and Rural Utility Services, administering over 70 types of programs. Those 70 types of programs annually through those loans and grants are an investment of about $30 billion. And that puts our portfolio currently at over $230 billion of investment. And so I share that because at Rural Business Cooperative Services, we work with the public and the private partners to connect rural residents and valuable resources by supporting businesses and helping rural America prosper. We know that if rural America is prospering, America is prospering. And so I look forward to talking to you a little bit more today as we uncover this.
Great, thank you. So now I'm going to sort of dig in a little bit more in terms of the fit of employee ownership with the agencies where you are. And Alex, I'm going to start with you, just if you can sort of talk about the bigger picture with the NEC and how you see employee ownership as part of sort of the broader economic agenda that you're trying to see go forward.
Yep, absolutely. So when I came over to the NEC and started checking around to see who was working on employee ownership, it didn't quite fit in neatly in any of our verticals, right? It's partially a small business issue, it's a competition issue, it's an industrial policy issue, it's a labor issue, it's a tax and retirement issue. And no one kind of had each piece of it together. So we spent some time thinking, how do we put together a cohesive narrative about why worker ownership fits with the president's broader economic agenda, and found that it fits quite well. And Senator Sanders laid out some of the reasons, including increased productivity and better dignity of work, and a lot of the benefits for workers, which on the labor side the president strongly supports. But kind of first and foremost, our boss director, Dr. Lael Brainerd, told us to come and make the rigorous economic case. And so as part of the president's broader industrial policy in particular, new major investments catalyzed by the infrastructure law, the Chips and Science Act, the Inflation Reduction Act. We see these giant fabs set up for semiconductors by TSMC and massive battery plants. But what often doesn't get told is that 90% of manufacturing firms in this country have 50 workers or less. 20% are set to retire, or owners representing 20% of that workforce set to retire over the next decade. I understand from previous remarks, successorship has been a topic that's been covered quite a bit today. We think that this is a perfect tool to be able to fit some of the priorities that we have for our small mid-sized manufacturing base, which really provides the backbone for our industrial policy here in the U.S. It's this supplier network, parts manufacturers, small businesses that are setting up these ecosystems around these major investments that are really going to make or break the big semiconductor fabs and the battery plants and all the rest as well. So from an industrial perspective, we think that employee ownership, overrepresented by ESOPs, is a perfect tool, and a number of organizations working on the ground to transition some of these companies that are mom and pop, have been family owned and employ 50, 100 people, that alternatively are just going to shut down or be bought largely and primarily by overseas competitors or private equity, who aren't going to share the same industrial policies and priorities that we do. More broadly, the president has centered workers in every part of his agenda, and this is no different. The opportunity to build work, to have dignity. The president always says a job is about more than a paycheck; it's about dignity. I think in no policy is that more personified than owning a share and a stake in the business where you work. Having that voice and the seat at the table, obviously a priority for the president's for collective bargaining and unionization, and now fitting in, I think neatly in that bucket is a priority for advancing and facilitating worker ownership of the businesses. And then lastly, the point on competition, right? The ability to have a thriving and dynamic ecosystem, and the ability to preserve some of these economic anchors in communities where they've lasted for so long. Small businesses, mom and pop shops, places that have served as institutional and community anchors for generations. The ability to preserve that structure and that institution without, as Senator Sanders said, getting snapped up by a financial firm who wants to take the assets and strip them and sell them off. We think that's a critical tool for be able to preserve competition in markets, and in particular in markets that have been hollowed out for so long or snapped up by consolidation. I think the work that RD and the USDA is doing to promote dynamism in rural markets in particular is a good case study there.
Great, thank you. Covered a lot of territory there. Lisa, the office you lead has sort of a long history with employee ownership, but you're also sort of absorbing some new areas of work. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the traditional role your office has played with employee ownership, but also the new role the office will be assuming as part of the Work Act, and how all of that fits with DOL's broader mission.
Sure, thanks, Maureen. So traditionally, the Employee Benefits Security Administration, EBSA, within the Department of Labor, our mission and our directive is to protect the hard-earned retirement and health benefits of America's workers and their families and people who are working within private industry employment. And so within that role, prior to the Work Act coming in, our interaction and our relationship with ESOPs was pretty limited because, as you all well know, ESOPs are a form of retirement plan. And as retirement plans that are governed by ERISA, there are certain requirements under ERISA that ESOPs need to comply with, mainly or most prominently, the requirement to act as fiduciaries and act in the sole and exclusive interest of the participants and beneficiaries of these plans. And so for all of the time leading up to the Work Act, which expanded our work in this area, our interaction was really limited to enforcement with respect to ESOPs that might not have been complying with these requirements, doing investigations, and seeking corrective action where necessary. So we were really limited and working really just in the enforcement space. Once Secure 2.0 was enacted and the Work Act was included as part of that law, we gain some additional roles and roles that we think fit really well together where we can incorporate the knowledge that we have about technical knowledge about ESOPs and how they work, as well as the department's broader goals with respect to workers, empowering workers, and working with employers to help create good jobs, in implementing the other provisions of the Work Act that I mentioned briefly before. First of all, to be educating and promoting worker ownership models, whether they be ESOPs, worker co-ops, trusts, the various different options that are available out there, and working closely with the worker co-op, worker ownership community to try to get additional information out there, have people become educated, again, both workers and employers, so that they can know that these options are available to them, how they work, what types of questions they can each be asking as they're going down this road, and just to promote that and bring awareness and also just the backing of the federal government as far as having an agency that can work directly with employers and employees that are looking to move forward with one of these models. Towards that end, we have been doing a lot of work over the past year or so that this has come under our umbrella at the department. We have established, we were required under the Work Act to establish an employee ownership initiative. We did that by creating last June a division of employee ownership within our Office of Outreach, Education, and Assistance. We established that at the end of June and have been working since then to meet with stakeholders, meet with just to be kind of learning and becoming a sponge with respect to all of the different information, how we can be helpful, what everyone thinks is needed in the community to promote and educate about these different types of options. And we are continuing to work to staff up that division, to get information out and working on publications and a page on our website, and just thinking of different ways that we can be most helpful with respect to that. We are also working, as I mentioned before, and as was mentioned prior to my remarks, on the formal guidance regarding valuation of employer stock with respect to ESOPs. We had previously announced, and we're continuing to go on in this road of providing that formal guidance in the form of notice and comment rulemaking. We are working very hard on getting out a draft rule or a proposed rule with respect to that. It does, as some of you may know, I am new to federal government. I worked 30 years in private practice prior to coming here. And prior to coming here, I would have said, why does it take so long to put out one of these rules, you know? And, you know, the ESOP Association already wrote it for you. I mean, what's taking so long? But it takes a lot longer than anybody would know for it to take to do these things. And we are really trying to work at incorporating everything that we have heard and we have learned, not only in the enforcement arena, but also from all of the different stakeholders that we've talked to along the way. And obviously, once we put out that rule, it will be a proposed rule for notice and further comments, and we look forward to working on that and hearing from everyone in that regard. The third piece of the Work Act that is within the Department of Labor is, as was referenced before, the grants that will be given once there is an appropriation there. We're obviously not at that point yet, but we will be working with other partners within the Department of Labor once that money is hopefully appropriated to be able to work on giving those grants. So we are really excited about that. As far as the other goals of the Department of Labor, I think that, and we think at the department, again, we're very excited about this, and it fits squarely within a lot of the goals of the department. The department is focused on investing in America's workers and partnering with employers and unions and government agencies in order to provide information and education, support, and collaboration so that we can improve job quality and access to good jobs. And worker ownership just fits so well within those goals, though I do think that it is something that the department has not focused on to date, but as we've been talking about it, everyone realizes how much it aligns with everything that we're doing. And the department's goals are really to create good jobs, which we think that worker ownership, again, fits right within there. Empowering workers and strengthening their voices, which I think there could be no greater way to empower workers and promote worker voice than with so many of these different worker ownership models. And so we're excited about that. And then also the enforcement of workplace protections, and EBSA has had a role with respect to that, and we will continue to have a role. And as we work forward on this rulemaking, I think that, you know, that'll be a huge step for everyone involved to have more clarity and to be able to have more information on how to set up and implement these types of entities. So we're really excited about it and really happy to be moving forward.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. Leroy, let me come to you. The Rural Business Cooperative Service has a long history in cooperative development, particularly in rural areas, as you were laying out earlier. So maybe you can just tell us a little bit more about the goals of that work, how you see it playing out in rural communities, and how both you know, all kinds of employee ownership and particularly co-ops fit within that.
Sure, great question. Well, first, some context. I think it's important to be reminded that in 1926, the Cooperative Market Act charged a division of the United States Department of Agriculture with acquiring, analyzing, and disseminating statistical information on agricultural cooperative services and associations. And think about that. We're now approaching, in a few years, 100 years since that act. A lot of great work has got into that and that act. That agricultural cooperatives are among the oldest businesses in the United States, if not the world. In the 1930s, electric cooperatives were formed to provide services to the 90% of rural residents who lacked electricity. In 2022, data from the National Rural Electric Cooperative Association shows that cooperatives now provide power to 56% of the nation's land mass and 92% of persistent poverty counties. And so when you think about all the things that have been said today, and I was thinking earlier about my prior backgrounds in healthcare, to look at, as I talk about the different types of challenges with silver tsunamis in relation to healthcare, not just from this perspective, or ambulances and co-ops really being, it's really an exciting time to be at RBCS, Rural Business Cooperative Services. And that's really because we look at RD business programs providing much needed investment to rural communities, obviously in partnership with private sector lenders and community-based organizations. And that happens in a number of different ways through loan guarantees. We work with them in direct loan process, through grants, through individual businesses, through cooperatives, either if we're talking about farmers or ranchers or public bodies or nonprofit corporations, tribes. We're always willing and learning to explore all those different ways in which we can be of assistance. And then on our cooperative side, our services both work to promote and support development of cooperative businesses, which often for us, is that market of agricultural products. And so we look at that through the electricity opportunities, broadband, connectivity, telephone services. But as you know, it's not even limited to that anymore. And later, as I continue to talk later, we'll talk about some of the healthcare excitement that's happening in a number of different areas, and specifically in home healthcare arenas, among other services.
Great, thank you. David, as we've been hearing, a lot of employee-owned companies are small businesses. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how employee ownership is situated within the Small Business Administration and how the Small Business Administration sort of can support that work.
Absolutely, thank you. I'll touch on a few of our programs at SBA. I'll start with SBIC, the Small Business Investment Company Program. This is a historic program, started in 1958, that really helped create the venture capital industry in the United States. We have over 300 funds that SBA licenses, supervises, and in many cases provides leverage to in the form of a loan. And these funds are an encouraging vehicle to support investment in employee-owned businesses, small employee-owned businesses. We are subject to size standards, and especially in the cases of a conversion where an investment is necessary to create an ESOP or a cooperative and provide that injection of capital. We have seen some encouraging investments recently. One fund under our SBIC program has created 3,000 employee owners just in the last few years. Through 13 different investments, and it spans across sectors: manufacturing, business services, retail, food and beverage, industrials, and healthcare. One of the companies is a steel manufacturer with 1,500 employees that completed an exit and returned $25,000 on average to each employee owner, which was exciting. And looking on the horizon, another fund was recently licensed by SBA, Cyprium in Ohio. That fund has ESOP as part of its target transaction type. They have supported those transactions outside of the SBA fund program previously, so we are optimistic about their investments going forward. We also have loan guarantee programs at SBA, maybe what we're most known for. The 7A loan, 504 loan program together do about $35 billion in lending support annually. And in 7A in particular, we see a steady stream of lending to cooperatives. We've seen an uptick, so in the last 2 complete fiscal years, approaching 70 loans. It's about a 50% increase over the prior years. ESOPs, we support and encourage ESOP loans to our lenders. We encourage them to do them, but they're not where we'd like them to be. I think more on that in the next segment, but we see a handful of ESOP loans in that program as well. And then counseling. Similar to the activity at DOL, we are encouraging and working with our resource partners to educate small business owners on the opportunity of employee ownership. And that centers around our Small Business Development Center network, SBDCs, you can find all across the country. And since 2020, SBA has had as part of the program requirement that SBDCs promote employee ownership through cooperatives or qualified employee trusts or other worker ownership models. So there's some exciting activity going on around the country within that program. The Association of Small Business Development Centers has a employee ownership and business transition interest group. It's led by the Texas SBDC, co-chaired by the Oregon SBDC, that they're meeting regularly and sharing resources across their network. The SBDC Clearinghouse maintains resources that all of the SBDCs can draw from. And then there are a few kind of standout leaders among the centers. The Northern California SBDC does regular trainings that are accessible to the whole country on their website on about a monthly basis. The Vermont SBDC network, Senator Sanders mentioned the center there. Our SBDC partners with the center quite closely. The New York SBDC is quite active, so we're happy about the growing engagement of our resource partner network and certainly looking to build upon that.
Great, thank you so much. Now we're going to sort of dive into a little bit of the successes, challenges, lessons learned. Lisa, I'm going to start with you this time. You talked about, sort of all the stakeholders you've been listening to, but it hasn't just been here in DC. You've been traveling around the country, touring employee-owned companies. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what you're learning from that experience and how that's informing how you're thinking about the role you have moving forward.
Sure. Yeah, thanks. I'm going to have my the T-shirts made up for the Gomez ESOP tour, so that you can see where I'm coming next. But it's been great. We've had a lot of excitement from folks on the Hill and certainly within the worker ownership community, and it's been wonderful. We've been trying to do as much as we can to incorporate visits when I'm out on the road for whatever reason. So I had the pleasure of accompanying Representative Courtney in Connecticut to visit an ESOP there a few months ago. We were also with Representative Landsman in Ohio, visiting both the folks at Co-op Cincy and learning a lot about their work, and an ESOP in the area as well. We have been working with different ESOP organizations to find out places that we can go, people we can visit and learn from. And so we visited an ESOP in the Dallas, Texas area. We also are going, or I'm going next week to Kansas City and to Kansas, Overland Park, and we have a number of visits set up there. So, and I am, have no shame in chasing down Senator Von Hollen and Senator Sanders and asking for, to accompany them to different locations. But it's not just to, travel around. It's been really wonderful to visit these different organizations and to learn that really no ESOP, no worker co-op is the same. Everyone is very different based on industry, based on location, based on just the people who are there, the workers who are there, the employers who are there. Just in the few that I have met so far, either in person or in speaking with them in virtual calls, everyone is kind of looking for the same thing, but in different ways. People may want different levels of interaction or involvement in decisions. People the different models are just interesting to look at. But one thing that I have found in every place that I've gone is, that sense of working towards a common goal and really feeling that they are a part of, that they are all working together and that the success of the company is meaningful to them. And however they got there, there have been different reasons for getting to that place. Sometimes it has been that there's been a retirement and and the employees have come in to own the company in a certain way. Sometimes it's been that the company just has looked to go in that direction, and the owners who were there before continue to be there, but are now working with the employees. And so it's just, it's been a very interesting experience, a big learning experience for me and for all the folks in EBSA to find out more about how these different entities work, and to just, we're very thankful for everyone who's been so generous in sharing their knowledge and their experiences, and just giving us different ways to really understand and look at what's out there. But continuing to go on the not the world tour, but the nationwide tour. So.
You can tackle the world next. Great. Thank you. David, I'm going to come back to you. There's been some efforts that, you were alluding to a little bit, sort of maybe not being happy with where your ESOP lenders are, but I know there's been efforts to make SBA financing and loans more accessible for employee-owned companies and for conversions. So maybe you can just talk a little bit about that and sort of where those efforts are today.
Absolutely, thank you. I'll start with a rulemaking that became effective at the end of last year that we are quite optimistic about across the board in supporting small businesses and filling capital gaps for underserved small business owners, rural, minority-owned businesses, and we think there's promise for employee-owned businesses as well. So the rule is called the Affiliation and Lending Criteria Rule, became effective last year. One of the knocks historically on SBA loans, they're too complicated. Okay, you get the you get a standard interest rate, which is better than what you would get outside SBA lending. There's rules around fees. You get the guarantee, which de-risks the loan for the lender, and you get a long maturity. Those are all great things, but there are a lot of kind of rules that go along with it. So we endeavored to, under Administrator Guzman, simplify as best as possible underneath the existing statute. One of those simplifications is around the affiliation rule. When you look at, well, who really owns this business? How many owners are there? So you can decide, is this truly a small business or not? It was becoming quite cumbersome for a lot of businesses to go through that affiliation test when, on paper is quite clear as in terms of the size of the business, the amount of revenue. This is a small business. To dissect the different affiliations that you might have by control. So we're hoping that that simplification of our affiliation test means that there are a greater variety of ownership structures where you have more owners in a business, including worker owners, that can more simply get through that eligibility process for SBA loans. Another provision in that rulemaking specific to employee ownership is around partial buyout. Previously, if you're going to use an SBA loan to acquire a business, you needed to acquire a controlling stake. And that's not always the route that a business is looking to go if they're looking to convert or move towards employee ownership. They want to sell part of the business to a group of workers, start bringing up their equity share, then they should be able to use an SBA loan to do that too. So we now allow partial buyout in the SBA 7A loan program, and are quite happy about that change. Looking forward, there are so many other things we can do. I especially appreciated Senator Sanders' comment about appropriations to support authorization. So double click on that comment. But I think there are a couple of pieces of legislation to point to. One that had the support of the administration. Build Back Better Act, as Alex mentioned. There was a small business title. Initially, a version that passed the House Small Business Committee had $25 billion. That would have really been a historic change in the role of SBA, including a cooperative lending program that initially was funded, I believe, at about $500 million, which really would have been transformative. Think about the size of SBA. It's about $1 billion a year agency. So it would have been a major program and investment. It was exciting to work on that legislation, and I think it's there, for maybe a future Congress to come along and take back up. I'll point to something a little more affordable also as a possibility, and that's the idea of SBA direct lending. SBA has made direct loans to small businesses, to homeowners, through most of our history through our disaster program. If there's a disaster declaration, if you're a homeowner with uninsured losses or a business owner affected by that natural disaster, you can get a low-interest loan, long-term loan from SBA with generous terms. It's also authorized in the Small Business Act for SBA to make direct general business loans. You're just looking to grow your business. The agency got away from that, over the 80s and 90s. It's still a charge that we have in our statute, and that Administrator Guzman believes we should restore as part of filling market gaps where private market lenders, the SBA guaranteed lenders, aren't sort of meeting the needs of the market. And so that's a proposal in the president's budget this year. It was also in the Build Back Better Act, but there is a proposal in the president's budget to tweak a few things in the Small Business Act. Does not require appropriation for SBA to begin making direct general business loans again to fulfill that charge and fill gaps. And I think, this is an example. Employee ownership is not specifically called out in that proposal, but it's an example of a market gap that could be filled if SBA had a greater role in directly influencing small business lending.
Great, thank you so much. Leroy, let's come back to you, and we're going to take a deeper dive into the Rural Business Cooperative Service. And I wanted you to talk specifically about initiatives being implemented to support worker-owned cooperatives. And in particular, you mentioned earlier, so I'm hoping maybe you can give us an example, but you mentioned care businesses, and I think it's important to remember that employee ownership isn't just for manufacturing or construction, or that's, which we've been talking about a lot today, but care businesses are also important. So maybe you can give us an example of a worker-owned cooperative.
Sure, great, I'm happy to. Let me first start off with how USDA rural development is helping support employee ownership. And that comes in a couple of different ways, and I do want to touch on the healthcare piece of that after. But one that we specifically look forward to helping is in technical assistance (TA). I mean, cooperative programs, we provide a lot of support for worker cooperatives through technical assistance, whether or not that's in person at a conference, through video conference calls, through a number of different publications. We address cooperative operations, governance, legal funding, ecosystem development, and so we have TA is very important in our arena. Number two, cooperative programs, and I'm going to rattle out a couple of these. And they may or may not apply to you. You might be thinking about them, but this is one of the areas where I want to best serve as a liaison, ensuring that our agency can help support you. Business and Industry Loan Guarantee, the Rural Energy for America, or the REAP program, Value Added Producer Grant, the Socially Disadvantaged Group Grant, Rural Cooperative Development Grant, Intermediate Relending Program, the Rural Economic Development Loan and Grant Program, the Rural Micro Entrepreneur Assistance Program, and the Rural Business Development Grant. And so we have a number of different experts who can help walk you through that. We have a great website, and I would say that because I've seen some of my other sister agencies' websites, and I think ours is pretty good, and there are a lot of good videos that can help you navigate that. But if you ever need our support, that's what we're here for. Number three, we provide outreach and cooperative education for federal, for state, for local, and for private partners. Through one of the ways that we do that is through our interagency working group on cooperative development. And just a couple of highlights on that kind of work that they're doing. That committee has been meeting on converting businesses to cooperatives. That's one of the standing meetings. They have a meeting that regularly meets on focus on creating equitable cooperative ecosystems. And then we also work with our partners, right, within the federal agencies, and one of them is, of course, the Department of Labor, with information on the worker cooperatives as they stand up and work to adjust their division of employment ownership through that Work Act. So a lot of great opportunities and examples that USDA and RBCS has that we're excited to share with you.
Great, thank you. And just a warning to the audience that we're coming to you soon, so be ready with your questions. But to close out this round, Alex, let's come to you and talk a little bit about how the NEC is thinking about aligning employee ownership effort across kind of these different agencies.
Yeah, so in many ways, we have the easiest job here on the table. We kind of go forth and say, we think we should be doing this, and then our agencies are the ones who actually have the money and the tools and the regulations and to be able to sort it out. So I think, most specifically, our role both in just promoting the overall message and priority from the White House perch is just ensuring that all of the various pieces of the federal government that are working on this issue, wherever they are within their respective agencies, are talking to each other and leveraging each other's assets. Funding has come up many times here. There's not a lot of dollars on the table for this particular effort, but by leveraging, DOL's new division and SBA's field offices and the existing interagency working group that was set up by the Farm Bill at USDA, being able to, as a force multiplier, being able to use the other agencies' assets and in particular the field staff. I mean, really being able to, the technical assistance point is a big one. Just being able to have these resources out there on the ground in the field where businesses are. They're not, not a lot of businesses actually here in Washington, D.C. knocking on our door looking for help, but through the SBA field offices, rural development has a state office in every state and territory, and a well-developed field staff, DOL the same. Trying to make sure that we have coordinated information out in the real world, and then really bringing the stakeholders and the investment side, the finance side, together with the public sector, with our stakeholders in the nonprofit community, really trying to do outreach across our various stakeholders and make sure that we're both, one, hearing the priorities and issues and challenges that you all are having, so that we may either facilitate fixes here on the internal government side or work with our partners in Congress to be able to facilitate. I think with any alternative ownership or alternative market structure that you can find, there's likely to be some federal regulation or some federal statute that has some sort of negative impact on something you want to do here. It's just kind of the nature of how we write our laws and institute and implement them. So knocking out some of these things that David and others have talked about that require rule changes or tweaking of statutory language to be able to better serve the community.
Great, thank you so much. And so now I welcome questions from the audience, and I'll invite you to also share your name and where you're from, if you like.
Hi, I'm David Rolfe, and for the purposes of this introduction, I'm the chairperson of a multi-employer pension plan serving the home care industry in the northwestern U.S. My question, as you might imagine, is two of you in your opening mentioned the administration's support for unions and collective bargaining. I'd love just to hear your thoughts on the intersection between collective bargaining and worker ownership.
I can start with that. I mean, I neglected to mention at the beginning, as far as my ties to, or my interest in employee ownership, is that for the time before I became a government employee, for 30 years I worked representing labor organizations, but primarily multi-employer funds like yours. And in doing that, became really familiar with just how jointly trusteed funds and just this cooperation, collaboration between union and management can work together to really serve the participants there, but the employees of these organizations. So, but to your question directly, I have personally, been very interested in that dynamic and in the union co-op space and where labor organizations fit into this equation. And so we have been also, as included in the stakeholders that we've consulted with, have talked with labor organizations who have had different experiences with worker co-ops. And certainly I think there are more labor organizations that might have experience working with ESOPs and either have ESOPs at companies that are collectively bargained or have sat on boards of ESOPs and have been involved in that to that extent. But also, I think that there definitely is a space for unions and for collective bargaining with respect to the worker ownership and worker co-op model. And that is something that as we are educating the various communities, certainly, making sure that we can include in those communities labor organizations to see how this can be another part of, and maybe, another chapter, a new chapter for labor organizations in looking at how we can all work together to be able to serve workers together in the best way possible. So I think there's a lot of exciting work to be done and things to be learned in that space.
Great, thank you. Anybody else want to add to that?
Hi, my name is Esteban Kelly, and in addition to being affiliated with Rutgers as an executive fellow, I think more importantly, I'm the executive director for the U.S. Federation of Worker Co-ops. And we've had a lot of very nuanced and technical conversations today. I want to really simplify things for a moment and ask from the perspective of each of your agencies, if you were giving organizations like ours advice as to how to advance worker ownership. Obviously, we do a lot of advocacy, but also partner on technical questions and on research and other things. I'm assuming that you have some sense of some of the roadblocks in each of your agencies that prevent, for example, the loans from 7A loans at SBA, that there's something from each of your departments that sort of gets in the way. So if you were giving advice to this room and to me and to my members about how to approach, like what would be the strategy to kind of catalyze or unlock the resources or the programs that already exist within your agencies, what would those kind of pivot points be? And I can clarify the question if you're confused.
I can start, Esteban, since you mentioned SBA. Thanks so much for your question and for the work of your center. Just to start with the 7A loan, which you mentioned, one of the barriers is that a core requirement of that program is that the borrower provide personal guarantee, which doesn't, naturally work as obviously well for an ESOP or a cooperative, but there is flexibility for a third-party entity to provide that personal guarantee. So that's sort of a next chapter for us that we're looking at, that we're asking about, is how can we encourage and make available opportunities to satisfy that requirement in potentially partnership with other organizations. So that's something that we could talk about, look into together. Another, just the first thing that came to mind from your question was, give us your feedback on the technical assistance material that the Small Business Development Center network is offering. I'd be happy to get in touch with you afterwards, kind of share those resource hubs, what's missing, what should we be emphasizing to small business owners, and what would you like us to highlight through our networks? Thank you.
I'm happy to jump into that. Esteban, correct? Okay, Esteban, I could say with a fresh set of eyes, just only being some 50-some days into the agency, that I think we have a portfolio that's massive, right? We have a lot of great programs, we have a lot of great opportunities, a lot of technical things. I think one of the things that we have been talking a lot about, and this will make sense, is less is sometimes more. And so sometimes in the sense of oversaturation of a website, that there's a million links, you just get routed here and there. It's really about these kinds of collective forums and finding the right people and or knowing the question. And I think sometimes for us, that's the challenge. We want to be helpful, especially in a lot of our state areas. As a previous speaker said, we have state directors who know those intricacies and also know the challenges that state might have or the program might have, and yet no one's been routed there first. So they're at the national level trying to navigate a system that could have kind of had a better pathway or a leg up going into the national. So I think sometimes it's first understanding what the question is or the ask. And then two, really for us, I think is, at least from the administrator's office, is really focusing and dialing on back to that less is more, those real direct communications and streamlining that so that it's easier. One of the things I failed to mention earlier is I not only want you to hear that from my side, but one of the great resources USDA has are success stories. And what I have found great about these success stories is it's helped me navigate and understand these are relevant now because they talk about other businesses and other organizations finding a pathway to success. And so maybe they were looking at a grant that was going to look for construction opportunities or infrastructure or technology. Whatever that was, it kind of helps create that pathway in a 1 to 2 page that talks about the grant, talks about when it was awarded, things like that.
And I think just from a macro perspective, I think 2 things. One, and I think this has been tremendously effective for employee ownership causes. Continuing to find and present champions. Right, a lot of good ideas out there. Unfortunately, nearly none of them become law. But with champions like Senator Sanders and Senator Van Hollen, others who have been pushing this work forward for years and decades in some cases. Keep staying at it and ensuring that whenever we are going to, Senator Sanders to discuss something, we know one of the things he's going to bring up is something on employee ownership, and knowing that we're going to have to deliver something for him. So I think continue to cultivate coalitions in particular that serve the broadest array of interests and communities, and different kinds of businesses, different examples and stories that can tell the benefits and the real on the ground real world stories of why this model is both empowering and effective. I think are very helpful for making the case, particularly to the federal side.
And I'll just round that out if I can, to say that at the Department of Labor, since we are really a new player in this area that has been around for a long time, I know that so many people within the community are excited about being part of how this develops, and have been really generous with information. And I would just encourage folks to continue to reach out to us. It's been great to be able to learn from all of the different entities, but please do not hesitate, as we grow, and I'm sure, that next year at this, as we all gather, there'll be many more things that we could be saying about what the department is doing, and a lot of exciting growth in that area. But definitely reach out to us and reach out to me directly. I mean, if many folks here have my direct information. I have cards with me, but I am always open to new ideas and how we can be expanding this. And one thing, as we were saying, Leroy was saying, less is more. Sometimes also when working with government agencies, less is less, and we don't have a lot to be able to be working with on every project that we would love to spend lots of, time, money, and resources on. And so I think with respect to this project in particular, it's we at the Department of Labor are really going to be looking to partners who are out there in the community so that we can, there's no need for us to be reinventing wheels here. There's lots of really great resources and information that is out there that I think we can work together to put out to this community and be using, again, the power of the federal government to I don't want to say legitimate, I can't even say the word, so I don't want to say it, legitimize, it's too late in the day, but to just give more force to this whole movement. So just look forward to continued partnership and good ideas from this group.
Thank you. Great question. Yes. Max.
Hi, thank you. My name is Greg Fasciano with the ESOP Association. Appreciate your time and devotion to this. And certainly, Secretary Gomez, question for you. Very much appreciate your approach. Thank you, not just in DC and meeting with stakeholders here, but being able to travel and going around and doing that is a refreshing approach. And so thank you for your engagement with that. Just, again, not just here, but around the country. Curious about the regulation. Maybe an update on thoughts on timing. I realize there may not be a date or something so specific, but thoughts on timing, maybe where that process is or how far along, and when we can expect that. It'll be an enormous issue for both existing ESOPs and surely, as you know, any prospective ESOPs. So it's something that I think reverberates throughout the entire ESOP community. So Any update on that? Thank you.
Yes, no, definitely. If there's one lesson that I've learned in this position, it's never to say when you think something's going to be done, because I've been known to say that and been awfully wrong. But again, we are working very hard in drafting a proposal, and we do have something that we are working to move forward. It is a very high priority, not only for EBSA, but for the department, and I think also for the administration to move this forward. I know that I get called directly by Senator Sanders asking how the project is going. So I can't say more other than, I certainly within the next couple of months, but it would be wrong for me to say exactly when. I've been known to tell people that you'll have it for holiday reading. I can't tell you which holiday they might be, but I figure that if I just say it's holiday reading, there are enough holidays in the calendar that, I can come close to one of them. But we're working on it, I promise.
Great. Okay, one last question over here.
Hi, I'm Corey Rosen with the National Center for Employee Ownership, and this for David Brown. I actually wrote the first Small Business Employee Ownership Act when I was working here in 1980, and went to the SBA after that was passed, and I started the National Center, and I said, you guys aren't implementing this, and they basically said, we'd prefer not to. Literally, almost. The Main Street Employee Ownership Act, I also was involved in drafting in 2018. And then the prior administration, when they came out with regulations on that, again, basically said, we'd prefer not to. They came out with regulations that were directly in contravention to the specific statutory language of the law. Some of that you've changed now, thankfully. But there's still some major obstacles, one of which is the SBA requires its own valuation, even though you have to do a much more rigorous valuation for ERISA. And if you are a trustee and you get two different valuations, which one do you use? And is somebody going to sue you if they say you use the wrong one? And the personal guarantee, the statute specifically says that you cannot, if the seller doesn't retain an equity stake in the company, that you can't have a personal guarantee requirement. And my understanding is the changes that you made are not permanent regulations, so I'm just wondering what that process will be.
Thank you, Corey. Appreciate that, and would love to follow up. There's a lot there, a lot more than we can address in a couple minutes, so please. The comment at the end about it not being a permanent, there are no truly permanent regulation, but that's not registering for me, so I would like to discuss that. Really, let me just say that, Administrator Guzman fully believes in employee ownership and pushing the envelope and doing what we can with the existing resources that we have, and we're not there yet. So just look forward to partnering with you and diving deeper into the items that you mentioned.
Great. So just to close, I'm going to ask you each just very lightning round. So looking into not the very far future, so next year's Employee Ownership Ideas Forum, maybe just share one thing that you hope would be different from your perspective. And let's see, Dave, why don't I start with you, and we'll just come down the line.
Sure. First thing that comes to mind, for obvious reasons, there's a lot of focus in this issue category on businesses that have been around for a while, owners that are nearing retirement, business transition. Let's talk about new businesses. The president talks about the small business boom in the United States. We're getting close to 17 million new business applications under the Biden-Harris administration. The top 3 years for new business applications are 2021, 2022, and 2023. We've got this, and it's the most diverse cohort of entrepreneurs that we've seen, according to a lot of indications. So as you're a new entrepreneur starting up a business, what are the decisions you can make now that would set you up for success to convert later or go ahead and start increasing employee ownership from the get-go?
Great. So let's talk about bringing new businesses into the employee ownership tent. Lisa?
Sure. So next year, I feel incredibly confident that we will have a rule to look at. We'll be talking in the past tense about at least the proposed rule that's out there. And also, I feel very confident about where I think there will be a lot of growth with respect to our division at the department. We have learned a lot over the past year, and but I think this next year we're past the learning stage and more into the doing stage. So I'm really looking forward to what we can talk about next year and how much we've done and how much we've learned, and hopefully it's not too far off, but we'll have a lot more people who are talking about worker ownership as options and what they've been able to learn as we've been doing more outreach on this.
Great. New year, new rule. Yep. Leroy?
Similarly, for us over at RD, again, 70-some plus programs in RBCS, over 26. And so a number of those grants, those loans, those opportunities that exist, but sometimes are hinged on being able to be utilized because of the lack of technical assistance that could be provided. And so really streamlining and ensuring that we're having better communications, more efficient communications, helping on the ground so that we can get things launched. So that's a benchmark that we'd look forward to measuring.
Yeah, fantastic. And
I'm going to go something I hope will be the same next year. I hope I am still here, and we are.
I'm glad someone said it.
We're able to finalize and complete some of the work that we've started. As Lisa and David were mentioning, we've got a lot of unfinished business on the table. I think we made a tremendous start, whether it's addressing, by regulation or statute or just programmatic implementation. It takes a little while to turn the ship that is the federal government. I think we've made great strides, and I think with a little more time, can really see, I think, the fruits of a lot of this labor as rules get finalized and money gets out the door, and some of this work gets to pay off.
great. Well, thank you all so much. That was fantastic.